I never thought a single x-ray would change everything I believed about my family, my health, and the person I trusted most in the world. My name is Elena, and I'm 24 years old. What I'm about to share with you might sound impossible, but every word is true. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up, I was always the smaller one. While other kids my age seemed to bounce back from playground falls and sports injuries like nothing happened, I was constantly nursing bruises, sprains, and what my family called mystery pains. My older brother Marcus, who's 6 years my senior, used to shake his head whenever I'd come home limping or holding my wrist after another incident. Weak bones run in the family, he'd say with that knowing look, the same expression our grandmother used to wear when she'd talk about our delicate constitution. Marcus seemed to have inherited the stronger genes, though. At 30, he was built like a linebacker, worked construction, and had never broken a bone in his life despite his physically demanding job. Our parents died in a house fire when I was 16 and Marcus was 22. The tragedy left us with nothing but each other and a small insurance settlement that barely covered funeral expenses. Marcus stepped up without hesitation, dropping out of college to work full-time so he could support us both. He found us a modest apartment across town and insisted I finish high school while he handled everything else. Those early years after losing our parents were brutal. I struggled with anxiety and what doctors later diagnosed as chronic fatigue syndrome. Some days I could barely make it through my classes. Marcus would come home exhausted from 10-hour shifts laying concrete, but he never complained about having to cook dinner or help me with homework. He became my rock, my protector, and honestly, the only family I had left. "You're all I've got, kiddo," he'd tell me during my worst moments. "We stick together no matter what." Marcus was incredibly protective of me, especially when it came to my health. Whenever I'd mention feeling dizzy or experiencing joint pain, he'd immediately attribute it to our family weakness. He'd bought every calcium supplement on the market, insisted I drink 3 glasses of milk daily, and even convinced me to start taking vitamin D drops. "Remember what happened to Great Aunt Rose?" he'd remind me, referring to our elderly relative who'd suffered multiple fractures in her 70s. "We can't take any chances with your bones." Despite his concerns, or maybe because of them, I tried to live as normally as possible. After graduating high school, I enrolled in community college for graphic design. The program was mostly online, which worked perfectly since I still experienced frequent fatigue episodes. I discovered I had a real talent for digital illustration and slowly started building a small freelance business designing logos and website graphics for local businesses. Marcus was incredibly proud of my artistic abilities, always bragging to his coworkers about his genius little sister. He'd bring home potential clients from his construction sites, and gradually my client base grew. Working from home allowed me to manage my energy levels and work around the bad days when my joints ached or I felt too exhausted to concentrate. Our relationship had always been close, but living together as adults created a unique dynamic. Marcus was naturally authoritative, used to making quick decisions on job sites, and that carried over into our home life. He handled all our finances, made most of the major decisions, and genuinely believed he was protecting me from stress that might worsen my health condition. "You focus on your art," he'd say whenever I offered to help with bills or household management. "Let me worry about the heavy stuff." I appreciated his care, truly I did, but sometimes I wondered if he saw me more fragile than I actually was. Still, I couldn't argue with his logic. Every few months, something would happen that seemed to confirm his concerns about my physical weakness. There was the time I slipped in our bathroom and sprained my ankle so badly I needed crutches for 3 weeks, or the incident at the grocery store when I lifted a case of water bottles and felt something pull in my back that left me bedridden for days. Each episode reinforced Marcus's belief that I needed extra protection and care. "See?" he'd say, not unkindly, but with obvious concern. "Your body just can't handle what other people take for granted." By my early 20s, I'd accepted this narrative about myself, avoided activities that might risk injury, turned down invitations that involved physical exertion, and generally lived a much more cautious life than most people my age. Marcus encouraged this approach, often reminding me that it was better to be safe than sorry. Our daily routine became comfortably predictable. Marcus would leave for work before dawn, I'd spend my day working on design projects, and evenings were reserved for cooking dinner together and watching television. Weekends meant grocery shopping, household chores, and occasionally visiting Marcus's friends for barbecues, where I'd usually end up sitting quietly while the others played volleyball or went swimming. I told myself I was content with this arrangement. Marcus provided stability and security, and my freelance work was slowly gaining momentum. Some of my designs had even been featured in local business publications, which made me feel like I was contributing something meaningful, despite my physical limitations. But deep down, I sometimes wondered what my life might look like if I weren't constantly worrying about my next injury or health episode. I'd see other young women my age hiking mountains, playing sports, traveling solo, and feel a pang of something I couldn't quite identify. Envy? Longing? I pushed those feelings aside, reminding myself how lucky I was to have Marcus looking out for me. That's how things stood until 3 months ago, when everything I thought I knew about my life, my health, and my brother came crashing down in the most unexpected way. It started with what seemed like just another accident, another confirmation of my family's weak bone curse. But sometimes the things that seem most ordinary on the surface hide the most extraordinary truths underneath. The morning it happened started like any other Tuesday. Marcus had left for work around 6, kissing my forehead and reminding me to take my calcium supplements. I was in my makeshift office, which was really just our dining table covered with my drawing tablet and reference books, working on a logo design for a new bakery downtown. I'd been sitting hunched over my work for about 3 hours when I decided to take a break. My neck was stiff, and I could feel that familiar ache starting to build between my shoulder blades. I stood up to stretch, rolling my shoulders and tilting my head from side to side, the way my physical therapist had taught me years ago. That's when I heard Marcus's truck in the driveway. He was home unusually early, around noon instead of his typical 6 o'clock arrival. I glanced out the window and saw him climbing out of his vehicle, moving with that particular heaviness that meant he'd had a rough morning on the job site. "Elena?" he called as he came through the door, his work boots heavy on our hardwood floors. "In here," I replied, saving my work and closing my laptop. "You're home early. Everything okay?" Marcus appeared in the doorway, still wearing his high-visibility vest and hard hat. His face was flushed, and I could see the tension in his jaw that usually appeared when he was dealing with difficult supervisors or equipment problems. "Job got rained out," he said, tossing his hard hat onto the counter. "Figured I'd come home and we could tackle some of those household projects we've been putting off." I noted, though something in his tone seemed off. Marcus wasn't usually one to leave work early, even when weather became an issue. His crew typically found indoor tasks or used the time for equipment maintenance. But I didn't want to question him when he was obviously already frustrated about something. "What did you have in mind?" I asked, stretching my arms above my head to work out the kinks from my morning of drawing. "Well, that shelf in the bathroom has been wobbling for weeks, and I noticed this morning that the smoke detector in the hallway is chirping again. Probably needs a new battery." Marcus moved around our small apartment with restless energy, picking up items and setting them down, opening and closing cabinet doors. I recognized this behavior. It happened sometimes when he felt like he wasn't in control of a situation, usually work-related stress that he couldn't directly fix. "I can help," I offered, though I knew he'd probably insist on handling the more physical tasks himself. "Actually, that would be great. You could hold the shelf steady while I tighten the screws." We made our way to the bathroom, which was barely large enough for both of us to work comfortably. The shelf in question was a simple wooden fixture that held our towels and toiletries. It had been installed by the previous tenant, and over the months, it had developed an annoying wobble whenever we placed anything on it. Marcus retrieved his toolbox from the hallway closet, while I positioned myself next to the shelf. The space was cramped, with the sink on one side and the shower door on the other. I had to stand at an awkward angle to get a good grip on the wooden shelf. "Just hold it steady," Marcus instructed, kneeling down to examine the mounting brackets. "It looks like the screws have worked themselves loose." I gripped the shelf with both hands, trying to keep it level while he worked. The angle was uncomfortable, and I could feel the strain in my shoulders almost immediately. Marcus was focused on his task,
using a screwdriver to tighten the hardware that secured the shelf to the wall. "How's that?" he asked, testing the stability with a gentle shake. "Still a little loose on this end," I replied, adjusting my grip to provide better support. Marcus moved closer, reaching across me to access the bracket on the far side. In the small space, this meant his body was pressed against mine, his arm extending over my shoulder. I could smell the familiar scent of sawdust and concrete that always clung to his work clothes. "Hold it tighter," he said, his voice slightly strained as he worked to reach the difficult angle. I pressed harder against the shelf, my arms beginning to ache from the awkward position. Marcus was working intently, his face concentrated as he tried to get the stubborn screw to catch properly in the wall anchor. That's when it happened. Marcus was applying significant pressure to the screw, his body weight behind the motion, when the screwdriver slipped. The sudden release of tension threw him off balance, and his elbow swung backward with considerable force. The impact caught me completely off guard. His elbow connected with my forearm just as I was bearing down on the shelf, and I felt something give way with a sickening crack that seemed to echo off the bathroom tiles. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I cried out and stumbled backward, my arm hanging at an unnatural angle. The shelf crashed down, toiletries and towels scattering across the bathroom floor. "Oh, God, Elena!" Marcus spun around, his eyes wide with shock and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Are you okay?" But I wasn't okay. The pain was so intense, I felt nauseous. And when I looked down at my arm, I could see an obvious deformity about halfway between my elbow and wrist. My forearm was bent in a way that arms simply aren't supposed to bend. "I think it's broken," I managed to gasp, cradling my injured arm against my chest. Marcus's face went pale, but then he seemed to collect himself. "Don't panic," he said, his voice taking on that authoritative tone he used in crisis situations. "Let me look at it." He approached carefully, his hands gentle as he examined my arm without touching the injured area. I could see him assessing the damage, his expression growing more serious. "We need to get you to the hospital," he said decisively. "Can you walk?" I nodded, though I felt dizzy from the pain and shock. Marcus helped me to the living room, settled me on the couch, and quickly gathered ice packs from the freezer. He wrapped them in kitchen towels and helped me position them around the injury. "I'm so sorry, kiddo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never meant for this to happen. You know how clumsy I can be sometimes." Through the haze of pain, I found myself reassuring him. "It was an accident, Marcus. These things happen." But even as I spoke the words, something nagged at me. Marcus wasn't typically clumsy. His work required precision and careful movement around dangerous equipment. He'd been handling tools for over a decade without any serious accidents. The force of his elbow hitting my arm seemed disproportionate to a simple slip of the screwdriver. "Weak bones run in the family," Marcus said, almost to himself, as he helped me into his truck for the drive to the emergency room. "I should have been more careful, knowing how fragile you are." The phrase sat uncomfortably with me as we drove through town. I'd heard it countless times over the years, always in the context of explaining away my various injuries and health issues. But sitting there with my obviously broken arm, something about Marcus's immediate resort to that explanation felt different somehow. At the hospital, the intake process was efficient, but painful. The triage nurse took one look at my arm and immediately classified my case as urgent. Within 20 minutes, I was in an examination room being assessed by Dr. Richardson, an orthopedic specialist who'd been practicing emergency medicine for over 15 years. "This is quite a significant break," Dr. Richardson observed, gently manipulating my arm to assess the damage. "Can you tell me exactly how this happened?" I recounted the bathroom shelf incident, while Marcus stood nearby, occasionally adding details about the cramped space and the unfortunate timing of his slip. Dr. Richardson listened carefully, making notes and asking follow-up questions about the angle of impact and the force involved. "We'll need to take x-rays to see the full extent of the damage," she explained. From what I can see and feel, you've got at least one complete fracture, possibly two. The good news is that it doesn't appear to have damaged any major blood vessels or nerves. As they wheeled me to radiology, Marcus squeezed my good hand. Everything is going to be fine, he assured me. These things happen when you've got delicate bones like ours. But lying on the x-ray table, staring up at the fluorescent lights while the technician positioned the massive camera above my arm, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this entire situation wasn't adding up the way it should. The x-ray results took longer than expected. I lay in the hospital bed, my arm now properly immobilized in a temporary splint, watching Marcus pace back and forth beside the window. He'd been unusually quiet since we arrived, responding to the medical staff's questions with brief, clipped answers that weren't like his normally chatty demeanor. Dr. Richardson finally returned, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. She pulled up a chair beside my bed and set the device down on the rolling table. "Elena, I need to discuss your x-ray results with you," she began, her tone more serious than it had been during the initial examination. "The break itself is actually quite straightforward. You have a clean fracture of both the radius and ulna bones in your forearm. With proper casting and physical therapy, you should heal completely within 6 to 8 weeks. "That's good news, right?" Marcus interjected, moving closer to the bed. Dr. Richardson glanced at him briefly before focusing back on me. "The fracture itself, yes. However, while reviewing your images, I noticed some unusual patterns in your bone density and structure that I'd like to discuss." My stomach dropped. Unusual how? She turned the tablet toward me, showing what looked like a ghostly outline of my arm bones. Even to my untrained eye, I could see the obvious break, a jagged line cutting across both bones. But Dr. Richardson was pointing to other areas of the image. "Your bone density appears to be completely normal for a woman your age," she explained, using a stylus to highlight different sections of the x-ray. "In fact, it's quite good. What's unusual is this pattern of healed microfractures throughout your skeletal structure." "Microfractures?" I repeated, not understanding. "Small stress fractures that have healed over time. Look here and here." She indicated several areas on the image. "These show up as slight irregularities in the bone structure."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
They're old injuries that your body repaired naturally. Marcus had gone very still beside my bed. What does that mean exactly? Dr. Richardson saved the current image and swiped to another view. It means that Elena has experienced numerous small bone injuries over the years, far more than would be typical for someone with normal activity levels, and definitely more than someone who's been as cautious as Elena describes. The room felt suddenly cold. "But I've always been told I have weak bones. It runs in our family." "That's what's interesting," Dr. Richardson continued. "Your bones aren't weak at all. They're actually quite resilient, which is evident from how well they've healed from repeated trauma. Elena, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I want you to answer honestly." She set the tablet aside and leaned forward slightly. "Have you experienced frequent injuries throughout your life? Falls, sprains, unexplained bruising?" "Yes, but that's because of my condition. My chronic fatigue and balance issues make me clumsy." "Have you ever been evaluated by a rheumatologist or endocrinologist for bone density issues?" I looked at Marcus, expecting him to answer, since he handled most of my medical appointments. He was staring at the floor, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "No," I said slowly. "Marcus always said it wasn't necessary since we knew it was genetic." Dr. Richardson nodded, making notes on her tablet. "Elena, I'd like to recommend some additional tests. Blood work to check for underlying conditions that might cause frequent injuries, and perhaps a full skeletal survey to get a complete picture of your bone health." "Is that really necessary?" Marcus spoke up suddenly, his voice strained. "I mean, she broke her arm in an accident. Why do we need all these extra tests?"
Something in his tone made both Dr. Richardson and me turn to look at him. His face was flushed, and there was a desperate edge to his voice that I never heard before. "Mr. Torres," Dr. Richardson said calmly, "these tests are standard protocol when we see this type of injury pattern. It's important to rule out any underlying medical conditions." "But she's fine," Marcus insisted. "She's always been delicate. Our whole family has weak bones. Her grandmother, her great-aunt, they all had problems." Dr. Richardson studied Marcus for a long moment before turning back to me. "Elena, have you ever spoken directly with your family members about their bone health or seen their medical records?" The question caught me off guard. "Well, no. They both passed away before I was old enough to have those kinds of conversations. But Marcus told me about their conditions." "I see." Dr. Richardson made another note. "Elena, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve to know what I'm seeing here. The pattern of healed fractures in your bones is not consistent with a genetic bone disorder or general fragility. It's consistent with repeated trauma." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Repeated trauma? The type of injuries we see in individuals who have experienced ongoing physical stress or impact to their skeletal system. Sometimes this happens in athletes who overtrain or in people who work in very physically demanding jobs. But given your lifestyle, as you've described it, I'm concerned about other possibilities. My mind felt sluggish, like I was trying to think through thick fog. "What other possibilities?" Marcus suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hospital floor. "This is ridiculous. You're scaring her for no reason. She fell down a lot as a kid. She's always been unsteady. Of course she has old injuries." But Dr. Richardson wasn't backing down. "Elena, I need you to think carefully. Can you remember the specific circumstances of your previous injuries? Not just that they happened, but exactly how they happened." I closed my eyes, trying to recall the various incidents over the years. The sprained ankle in our bathroom. Marcus had been rushing to get ready for work, and I'd been in his way near the sink. I remembered him being frustrated, moving quickly, and then suddenly I was on the floor with my ankle twisted beneath me. The back injury from lifting the water case. Marcus had been with me at the store, had pointed out the case and suggested I grab it, since he was dealing with a work phone call. When I'd hesitated, saying it looked heavy, he'd gotten impatient. "You can't be helpless forever, Elena," he'd said. I'd lifted it to prove him wrong and felt something tear in my lower back. The various bruises I'd attributed to my own clumsiness, but now, forcing myself to remember clearly, many of them had occurred during moments when Marcus was stressed or frustrated about something else entirely. "Elena," Dr. Richardson's voice was gentle but insistent, "I need you to ask you something, and I want you to answer based on your own observations, not what anyone has told you. Do your injuries tend to happen more frequently when you're around your brother?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my eyes and looked at Marcus, who was standing frozen by the window, his face a mask of panic and something that looked almost like rage. "That's a terrible thing to suggest," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Elena, tell her. Tell her that I've never hurt you. Tell her how I've taken care of you all these years." But suddenly memories were flooding back with startling clarity. Marcus's hand on my shoulder pushing me toward the stairs when he was angry about a work deadline, resulting in my tumble down 3 steps and a badly bruised hip. His elbow accidentally connecting with my ribs during what he claimed was a playful wrestling match, leaving me unable to breathe properly for days. The countless times he'd grabbed my wrist too tightly when he was frustrated, always followed by apologies and explanations about how delicate I was. "Elena," Dr. Richardson said softly, "I'm going to step out and give you a few minutes to process this information. But I want you to know that if you're ready to talk about what's really been happening, I'm here to listen."
And more importantly, I'm here to help. She stood up and moved toward the door, pausing to add, "There are people trained specifically to help in situations like this. You don't have to figure this out alone." After she left, the room fell into a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. Marcus slowly turned from the window to face me, and for the first time in my life, I saw him clearly. not as my protective older brother, not as the man who'd sacrificed everything to take care of me, but as someone who had systematically convinced me that I was fragile and helpless, while being the very source of my injuries. "Elena," he said, his voice now pleading, "you know I love you. Everything I've done has been to protect you. You're all I have left." I looked at my broken arm, then at the X-ray images still displayed on the tablet Dr. Richardson had left behind. The evidence was right there in black and white. Years of healed fractures. A pattern of trauma that told a story I'd been too trusting, too grateful, too isolated to recognize. "The weak bones," I whispered. "There never were any weak bones in our family, were there?" Marcus's silence was answer enough. But what came next was even more revealing. Instead of denial or explanation, his expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "You're not going anywhere, Elena," he said quietly. "You can't survive without me. You know that." For the first time in 8 years, I realized that the person I'd trusted most in the world had been systematically destroying my body and my sense of reality. And now, finally, I had proof. The transformation in Marcus's demeanor was immediate and chilling. Gone was any pretense of the caring, protective brother I'd known my entire adult life. The mask had finally slipped completely, revealing someone I didn't recognize at all. "You think you're so smart now," he said, moving closer to my hospital bed. "But what exactly do you think is going to happen here? You're going to tell some doctor that your brother has been hurting you? Who's going to believe that?" I pressed the call button for the nurse, my heart racing as I realized how vulnerable I was, lying there with a broken arm, no way to defend myself if he decided to escalate things further. "They have the X-rays, Marcus. The evidence is right there." He laughed, but it was a sound completely devoid of warmth. "Evidence of what? That you're accident-prone? That you've had injuries over the years?" "I've been documenting your clumsiness for 8 years, Elena. Every doctor's visit, every emergency room trip, every time you've hurt yourself because of your chronic fatigue and balance problems." The calculated nature of his words sent ice through my veins. This wasn't a momentary loss of control or a sudden revelation of anger. This had been planned, systematic, deliberate. "You've been planning this," I whispered. "All of it." "Planning what? Taking care of my sick little sister? Sacrificing my own life to make sure you had somewhere to live and food to eat? Nobody forced me to do that, Elena. I chose to take care of you." But his version of taking care of me was becoming clearer by the minute. Keep me isolated, dependent, convinced that I was too fragile and sick to function in the world without him. Make sure I never developed relationships or support systems outside of our household. Convince me that every injury was my own fault, a result of my inherent weakness rather than his deliberate actions. "Why?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Marcus sat down in the chair Dr. Richardson had vacated, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. For a moment, he looked almost like the brother I remembered from years past, and that somehow made everything more horrifying. "After Mom and Dad died, I was supposed to get custody of you, right? 17-year-old kid inheriting his teenage sister. Everyone expected me to ship you off to foster care or relatives, get on with my life. But I didn't do that." He paused, as if expecting gratitude for this basic act of not abandoning me. "I gave up everything. College, my friends, dating, my entire future. Everything I did was for you. And you know what I realized after a few months? You were going to grow up. You were going to finish high school, maybe go to college, get a job, meet someone, move out. And then what would I have to show for all my sacrifices? Nothing." The twisted logic was becoming clear, and it made me sick to my stomach. "So you made sure I couldn't leave?" "I made sure you needed me," he corrected. "The chronic fatigue was real, by the way. You did develop that after Mom and Dad died. But it wasn't as severe as I made you believe. A few days of missed school here and there became, Elena can't handle the stress of regular attendance. Some normal teenage moodiness became, Elena has serious depression and anxiety that require constant monitoring. I thought about all the doctor's appointments over the years, always with Marcus present,
always with him doing most of the talking while I sat quietly beside him. He'd controlled the narrative from the beginning. And the injuries? Started small. A little push when you were walking down the stairs. Then I'd rush to help you and fuss over your sprained ankle. You were so grateful for my attention, so apologetic about being clumsy. It was almost too easy. Marcus stood up and began pacing again. But this time his movements were different. Less nervous energy, more predatory stalking. The beautiful thing about chronic fatigue is that it explained everything. Why you were tired all the time, why you had trouble concentrating, why you seemed to hurt yourself so often. And the more you became isolated, the more you depended on me to interpret everything for you. Your symptoms, your limitations, your family medical history. The weak bones, I whispered. There never were any weak bones in our family, were there? Marcus's silence was answer enough. But what came next was even more revealing. Instead of denial or explanation, his expression hardened into something cold and calculating. You're not going anywhere, Elena, he said quietly. You can't survive without me. You know that. The nurse finally appeared in the doorway, responding to my call button. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who took one look at the tension in the room and seemed to immediately assess that something was wrong. Is everything all right in here? She asked, her gaze moving between Marcus and me. Everything's fine, Marcus said smoothly, instantly shifting back into his public persona. My sister just got some concerning news about her test results.
We're both a little overwhelmed, but I wasn't going to let him control this narrative anymore. Could you please ask Dr. Richardson to come back? I need to speak with her privately. The nurse nodded, but Marcus immediately interjected. Actually, I think Elena needs some time to process everything first. Maybe we could speak with the doctor together in a little while. No, I said firmly, meeting the nurse's eyes directly. I need to speak with Dr. Richardson right now, and I need to speak with her alone. The nurse looked at Marcus, who was clearly struggling to maintain his composed facade. Sir, I'll need to ask you to step into the hallway while I get the doctor. That's really not necessary. Elena gets confused when she's in pain, and she needs me here to help her communicate with medical staff. But the nurse had obviously dealt with situations like this before. Hospital policy is that patients have the right to speak with their medical team privately if they request it. I'll be back with Dr. Richardson in just a moment. After they both left, Marcus turned back to me with unconcealed fury. You have no idea what you're doing, Elena. You think these people care about you? You think they're going to help you build some kind of new life? You can't even function without me. Maybe that's because you've spent 8 years making sure I couldn't function without you. And where exactly do you think you're going to go when you leave here? You have no money of your own, no credit, no job history, no friends, no family besides me. Your freelance work barely covers your art supplies, let alone rent and living expenses. He was right about the practical realities, and we both knew it. I'd been so completely dependent on him for so long that the idea of independent living seemed almost impossible. But the alternative was staying trapped in this nightmare indefinitely. You'll come home with me tonight, Marcus continued, his tone becoming more confident. You'll heal from this broken arm, and things will go back to the way they were. Because deep down, you know you need me. You know you can't survive out there on your own. Dr. Richardson returned at that moment, followed by the nurse and another woman I didn't recognize. The new person was wearing a hospital ID badge, but dressed in street clothes rather than scrubs. Elena, this is Sarah Chen from our social services department, Dr. Richardson explained. I've briefed her on your situation, and she'd like to discuss some options with you. Marcus started to protest, but Dr. Richardson held up a hand. Mr. Torres, I'm going to have to ask you to wait in the family lounge down the hall. Elena has requested privacy for this conversation. She's my sister. I have a right to be involved in her medical decisions. Elena is 24 years old. She's legally entitled to make her own medical and personal decisions without input from family members if she chooses. The nurse stepped forward, and I realized she'd brought hospital security with her. 2 uniformed guards were standing just outside the door, clearly prepared to escort Marcus out if necessary.
Marcus looked at me with an expression of pure rage mixed with desperation. Elena, think about what you're doing. Think about everything we've been through together, everything I've sacrificed for you. But for the first time in 8 years, I was thinking clearly. I was seeing the difference between sacrifice and control, between protection and manipulation, between love and possession. I'm thinking about it, I said quietly. That's exactly the problem. After Marcus was escorted out, Sarah Chan explained my options. There were shelters for people in domestic abuse situations, programs to help with job placement and housing, legal resources to help me establish financial independence. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine to travel. Dr. Richardson had already contacted specialists who could help address the long-term effects of repeated trauma, both physical and psychological. There would be therapy, medical monitoring, and a complete reevaluation of my actual health status now that I'd be receiving care from providers who didn't get their information filtered through Marcus. 3 months later, I'm writing this from my own apartment. It's small, barely more than a studio, but it's mine. My graphic design business has grown substantially now that I'm not operating under the constant stress and fatigue of an abusive living situation. Turns out that chronic exhaustion is often a symptom of psychological trauma rather than an inherent medical condition. I've learned that Marcus was charged with assault and false imprisonment after the hospital reported our case to authorities. During the investigation, they discovered that he'd been systematically controlling my access to medical care, financial resources, and social connections for years. The pattern was so well documented through medical records and witness statements that his legal team advised him to accept a plea deal. He's currently serving 18 months in county jail, followed by probation, with a permanent restraining order that prohibits him from contacting me. The house we shared, which was actually left to both of us in our parents' will, has been sold. My half of the proceeds gave me enough money to start over properly. I still have moments of doubt, times when I wonder if I'm really capable of managing my own life. 8 years of systematic gaslighting doesn't disappear overnight. But I'm working with a therapist who specializes in sibling abuse, a form of domestic violence that's often overlooked because we assume family members always have our best interests at heart. The most surprising discovery has been my actual physical capabilities. Without constant stress and the fear of imminent injury, my energy levels have increased dramatically. I've started hiking, something I never thought possible during my years of supposed chronic fatigue. My balance issues, which I'd attributed to an inner ear problem, disappeared entirely once I was no longer walking on eggshells around someone who might push or trip me at any moment. I've also reconnected with extended family members who Marcus had convinced me weren't interested in maintaining relationships with us. It turns out that several relatives had tried to reach out over the years, but Marcus had intercepted their calls and emails, telling them I was too unwell for visitors or social contact. My cousin David, who lives about 2 hours away, has become a regular part of my life again. Through him, I've learned the truth about our family medical history. No genetic bone disorders, no pattern of chronic illness, no inherited fragility, just normal people living normal lives with the typical mix of health challenges that affect most families. The revelation that changed everything was also the simplest one. That X-ray didn't just show my broken arm, it showed years of healed fractures that told the story of systematic abuse disguised as protection. Sometimes the truth is hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right person with the right expertise to recognize what they're really looking at. I keep a copy of those X-ray images in my apartment, not as a reminder of trauma, but as proof of survival. Every healed fracture represents a time my body repaired itself, a time I endured something difficult and came through stronger. My bones aren't weak at all. They're evidence of resilience I never knew I possessed.